Alright, welcome. This is a tutorial for Lingo 2, working in Godot 4.3 Steamworks. In particular, this will be an introduction to the receiver class that Brenton uses extensively in Lingo 2. So, first of all, let's look at what the receiver class actually is. Panels have it. Panels extend it right here. We can look at doors, and you'll see that doors extend it right here. And there's actually a lot of stuff that extends it. So if we briefly take a look at it, the receiver just takes a number of senders and a number of things to exclude. And then it uses this code here. Please don't collapse it when I was trying to highlight it. This code here just essentially takes all of the senders, and then it adds all of the senders that can be found under the sender groups, including if nested is clicked, then it will take all of the grandchildren of a node. So right now, with how I have the setup, room 2 and room 1 and room 2 with 7 panels, if I put panels in there and nested is clicked on right here, then it'll take all of these 14 panels as senders. If nested is not clicked, then I would put room 1 in, and it would get all these panels 1 through 7 in there. So it'll be looking for all the children, if it's in the sender group, if you don't click nested, and all of the grandchildren, if you click nested. Then it counts them, or if you have complete at filled in, this little thing right here, this field, it'll count the number of senders there, and most things will only handle triggered when the number of things that have been, number of triggered signals they have received is equal to or larger than the total amount or the complete at that they have. This is not true for everything, and the first thing we're going to look at is going to show that. The real magic of senders is that every receiver is expected to implement handleTriggered and handleUntriggered, and every sender is expected to have a signal that's called trigger and untrigger, which will toggle these things in the receiver. So if we look at panels, these are receivers, and panels are also your main senders. They are also the things that are mainly sending stuff. When we can look down here, we see that they have single trigger and single untrigger. That is all you need to be a sender of any sort, is these two signals emitted somewhere. So let's go down to handleTriggered and handleUntriggered, and we'll see what they do. When a panel is triggered, it will complete. When a panel is untriggered, it will uncomplete. This doesn't do anything with total, and it doesn't count the amount of triggers. So let's see what happens there. So don't normally just F6 into your scene. Why is this not loading? And I need to change from window capture into desktop capture so you can see this. There we go. Now, this erased my save file for the entry, by the way, but I'm cool with that. So right now I have panel 1 here, and it's hooked up to this panel and also to this panel. And the problem with that is it's not going to actually count, you know, which panel is activating it or anything. It's just going to, whichever panel most recently set a signal is going to determine the state of this panel. So in effect, I can only really have one panel triggering this and have it working as you might expect. If I have 4 panels hooked up to this one panel, anytime I solve any of those panels, this will be solved. Anytime I unsolve any of those 4 panels, this will be unsolved. So in this case, I have 2 solved. I unsolved this. This is now unsolved. I solved this. This is now solved. That's not really behavior you expect. Now, panels were never really meant to be receivers in that sense, although they can accept a single sender without, giving buggy behavior. Doors, however, are the more prototypical type of receiver. So if we look at this receiver here, when we look at its handleTriggered, you'll notice it increments and decrements the triggered counter, and if the triggered is more than the total, which might be the complete at that you send instead, then it sets its run to true, so it knows not to untrigger when you untrigger, and then it animates. And this only does this if this isn't run. So what this means is if I have 4 panels hooked up to this door and my complete at is set to 2, Then I need 2 of those panels to be completed, and then the door will move downwards by default. Because its animate distance here is -5, it'll move -5 in the y direction. If I then untrigger it, it will then move back up. This is what we want. This is how you think things should work. Now, in Lingo 1, we pretty much only had panel and panel groups, which were implemented independently on everything that wanted to be affected by panels. In this case, receiver is now a generalized class, and that actually gives us a whole host of other things that can be senders besides panels. So key holders, for example, can be a sender. So if I now look at a key holder, where is a key holder? Key holder, by the way, is the actual name of one of these things. I usually call them, I've called them letter holders before I, got into the repo. We look here, and it has this trigger and untrigger signals, which is all it needs to be a sender. So now these can act like panels for the purpose of, like, opening doors. You might want to hook up 4 letter holders, and if you put 3 letters into 4 of them, the door opens. If you want a particular key, then you need to go into the listeners, and you want in particular a key holder listener. And this key holder listener now takes a key holder as a sender, and then it checks whether that key holder has the letter that you put here. So if I want to make sure that this only opens with an S, I would put an S here. This would be a sender, and now my door is going to listen to the key holder listener. So now let's try that out. Actually, let's make that H because I don't want to redo my collectible. Alright, so now I put on my H, and now my door opens. Whereas if I had made this, say, an S, let's just do that real quick. Practical demonstrations stick a lot better in the brain. Now it doesn't open. So, as you can see, now I can set doors and other things to be triggered by a large array of things, just by making sure I have the trigger and untrigger signal. I also can make a hell of a lot more receivers. And I just gave you a preview of those when I typed listener. All of these do different things when you hit them with signals. So some of them will warp you between maps, that's the world port listener. Some of them will change the gravity, that's the gravity listener. Some of them are, like the key holder listener in particular, is particularly made to see if a key holder has a particular letter. Now, the reason that's not implemented directly on the key holder is that you might have a key holder, like, say, the ones in the control center, which might take 7 or 8 different key holders, and, 7 or 8 different keys. So you make a listener for each key that it might be, and then you can chain those together. And for chaining stuff together, I'm going to point out the merging listener and the reversing listener. So the merging listener is extremely basic, and you might not understand what it's meant to do as you look at it. All it does is when it has more than the complete at, it triggers and untriggers. That's what every receiver does. What's so special about this? What's special about this is that it emits its own sender signal. So if I have 3 merging listeners, so I have 2 rooms here. I have room 1 and I have room 2. So I'm going to set merging listener 1 to be to room 1. I'm going to set merging listener 2 to be in room 2. And then I'm going to set merging listener 3 to have merging listener 1 and merging listener 2. Right now, as long as I've completed all 14 panels, merging listener 3 is going to open this door. So let's just reset this and put merging listener here 3. But I could have done that anyways, just by moving both of those sender groups to here. What I can do special here is now I can set the complete at to 4 here and the complete at to 4 here. And what that does is I have 7 panels here. Now you need to complete at least 4 panels in room 2 and at least 4 panels in room 2. I might have said room 2 twice there. And that'll activate merging listener, and then it'll activate merging listener 2, and then it'll activate merging listener 3. Now I've created a condition where you need to solve 4 panels from each group. I could have just set this to 8, but then I could have done 7 panels in room 1 and 1 panel in room 2. Now I've split up which panels need to be solved. And what about if I want one of those panels not to be solved? That is where the reversing listener comes in. The reversing listener is like the merging listener, except it emits an untrigger when it's triggered and a trigger when it's untriggered, which means I can now set this up to a panel that I don't want to be solved. So I could say, you know what, panel 3 needs to be in here, and then merging listener 3 also needs to have reversing listener. So now the reversing listener is going to send its signal only when this panel isn't triggered. And when you do solve that panel, it's going to undo it. So now I need to solve 4 panels from room 1 and 4 panels from room 2, but not that one panel because of the reversing listener. So between this merging and reversing logic, you can now do everything that you used to be able to do in visual expressions. And visual expressions, in particular, they would use to teleport something and make it invisible. And guess what? I have a... where is it? Visibility listener here, and I have a teleport listener here. This makes things visible or invisible. This teleports stuff to other coordinates. That is exactly what the visibility expression did. But now, I have so many other things this could do. So, I'm going to go over all of those listeners in a future tutorial, but for now this has been your brief introduction to receivers and how they're much more flexible than what was seen in Lingo 1. For the scripters in particular, I think you'll be excited to look at this and realize what it can be used for.